Okay, thanks everybody for coming. My name is, I'm Rich Daugherty. I'm out of HP, out of Enterprise Security Solutions, which is a piece of HP that primarily does security consulting, security solutions, not product. So I'm not the Fortify sales guy. I'm not the tipping point sales guy. However, I am HP, and I would love it if you bought all of our products, all of them. But okay, that's the end of the sales pitch. And Mary's running off, so I will not ask her to introduce herself real quickly. So do about a 30-second.
And very quickly, my name is Mary Morshed. I'm with the California Information Security Office. I'm the statewide Information Security Risk Management and Privacy Program Manager. So welcome everyone this morning. We're glad to see you. And we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic, privacy impact assessments.
So with that in mind, how many people in the room have done a privacy impact assessment of some kind? See, a few hands. How many people in the room are being threatened with, you will do privacy impact assessments? I see a few more hands. Okay, how many people have privacy as part of their actual job responsibilities? Okay, it's a lot of hands, okay. So we're going to kind of hit, we're going to kind of talk really fast on some of these topics, kind of try to hit sort of like the what is, why do you do them, when should you do them, who should do them, and then a little bit of some hows to help you do them. Nice thing about this type of an agenda, I really didn't have to write privacy in until the very end, because this theme can kind of apply to many things, right? So kind of the first, what is privacy? If you're going to do a privacy impact assessment and you have no notion of what privacy is, it's kind of hard to assess the impact to it, right? Sort of two definitions. This is the classic starting point, 1890. I mean, dates like that make even me feel young. From the UK, the right to be protected against intrusion into your personal life or affairs. So what we're dealing with is personal information and the access to the personal information, the usage of it, and how that usage might intrude or impose upon people's personal lives and affairs. Some definitions: personal information, something that can be related to an identified or identifiable individual. Things like age. If I told you my birth date, that's personal information about me. If I told you my home address, that's personal information about me. If I told you my business address, that's personal information about me, but normally not considered sensitive. So my personal email is liable to be treated differently than my business corporate email, especially by Hewlett-Packard. IP address. Who in the room views IP address as being personal information? Okay, who does not think it's personal information? Okay. This is an interesting one. Kind of stretching far afield. In India, IP address is actually identified as very specifically personal information. A lot of US laws don't consider it personal. When the fact that my home IP address stays the same now for months and years because the connection's always on, it starts feeling more personal than it did in the days of the modem when it's changed 2 or 3 times a day when you dialed in. So some of the definitions are fuzzy. Some of the decisions are, well, is this personal or not personal? Sometimes can go either way. Kind of shifting sensitive personal information. Okay, there's a lot of information that we don't consider as particularly sensitive. Most cases, I mean, age, male, female. Other, we do consider sensitive. Medical information. Why did Rich see the doctor last week? Financial. How much money is or is not in his checking accounts? Sexual orientation for people. Non-personal information that cannot be related back. So if I have a list of, for example, of just that there's a person of this age in this zip code, generally that would probably be viewed as non-personal, because I can't take and say, okay, 51-year-old in 27511, who is that? Don't know, can't trace it back. There are dangers here. Yes?
I was thinking in rural areas, what if the population's less than like 50 or something?
That's an excellent example where you really have to be data dependent. That's a great example. Actually, I like that example better than the example I was going to throw out next. Did everybody hear what she? Okay, so example was, what about in a rural area where maybe the population is 50 people? Now I've got a list of just 50 ages, and I can probably pick out the older folks. I can probably pick out maybe a lot of the younger folks pretty easily. All of a sudden, that non-personal information became a little bit back to being identifiable. The other classic example of why age is potentially a bad one, is how many 100-year-olds are there in the U.S.? There's a few. I don't know the actual number, but generally there's not a whole lot of them in any particular zip code. So if I have something that says this person is 100 years old, they live in this zip code, and they have this much money, and let's see, okay, good, it came back here, it came back there. All of a sudden I've identified information. So when dealing with non-personal information for statistical and aggregating, thought does have to get put back into, is this something where they can be pieced back out later? So privacy impact assessment. This is a pair of definitions of what a PIA is. This is out of the International Association of Privacy Professionals book, the Foundation's book, which I left in the hotel room this morning. I was aiming to bring it. I was having fun with the hotel because evidently they didn't actually check me in when I arrived the other day. And housekeeping wanted to know why there was somebody in the room this morning. So I had extra privacy for the last 2 days. Okay, but a PIA is a checklist or a tool to ensure that a personal information system, so an information system, is evaluated for privacy risks and designed with lifecycle principles in mind. I'll mention a little bit more on lifecycle principles later, but basically that's the thought of, if you're dealing with privacy, there's certain aspects of data life and data life cycle, and that you're taking those in consideration with an information system or an application. Related privacy assessments or audits are reviews of an organization's compliance with its private policies, procedures, laws, regulations, SLA, standards adopted by the entity and other contracts. So you have privacy obligations. Some come from regulations, some come from corporate organizational policies, some come from client expectations. Okay, who has real privacy expectations of Facebook? See a lot of, ooh, good. All right, there you go. You've evaluated the, so it is like, okay, I expect Facebook to respect my privacy to the extent that it doesn't get in the way of them making money. Yeah. Actually, there's other places that have been much worse for the hackers. I will not ask if anyone had an Ashley Madison account. Anyone heard about the Ashley Madison hack? A lot of Yeah. Oh, you're just right. Yeah. And that's one that's a huge privacy impact for people who had accounts for all type, I mean, without even knowing what type of reason they had the account. I mean, that information is now out. And the privacy risk of that information was extremely high. Now, whether Ashley Madison did the right level of privacy impact assessment and then the right level of follow-through of protection, I think the last piece is always answerable as, well, they failed, therefore they clearly didn't. The first, you have a hard time tracing back, right? Except I guess we can read their emails also, so, because those got leaked as well. Okay, but so PIA is a tool. Okay, it's a tool for assessing something. Okay, so it's not really the end, it's not the thing, it's not really the end result in a lot of ways. It's what you want to use to achieve privacy and to impact the privacy constraints on your application. Why? Mentioned a lot of these. Compliance is a big one. Federal government, E-Government Act of 2002 basically told the federal government agencies, you will do these. And when the federal government agencies get told that you will do these in laws, they go off and do them. We can argue about whether they do them with the intent of using them to impact positive or just the intent of getting the checkbox and sending the GSA on. There's regulations that apply to data usage. Healthcare, HIPAA. This does not specifically say you will have to do a PIA, but if you have healthcare data and you're trying to determine are you meeting the HIPAA requirements, the PIA becomes a good way to feedback the tool. Financial with Graham-Leach-Biley, CAN-SPAM Act for email addresses. Not that compliance is not important, but risk management. If you don't understand the private data you have and you're processing and you're using, and you don't understand the risk with that, then it's unknown risk waiting to explode. Right? It's a way to engage data custodians, data users, right? Application developers saying, sure, I can send everybody in the database an email address. There's no problem with that, right? If there was, they wouldn't have the email address in the database, right? Somebody decided that long ago. But so it's a way to engage the application developers so that they don't do actions that put the organization at higher risk. Way to engage the business. Give a marketeer a set of email addresses. What do you think they're going to do with them? They're going to use them. So with a PIA, you have the hope of influencing them and letting them understand how they can use them, what they should or should not be doing. Like I said, and ultimately it's a way of helping to make sure that you handle data appropriately. Because people also have expectations, not all of which are encoded in regulations. So when? Trite statement, if you've already collected a whole bunch of especially sensitive personal information and you haven't done an impact assessment, now would be a good time to start. Because if you got a bunch of medical records and you don't know what you're doing with them, you don't know how they're being used, where they're going, what partners you're sharing them with, what those partners have agreed to, then there's risk flowing through there. But otherwise, really, when projects are coming into place that are using the data or are collecting new types of data. So you're rolling out maybe a mobile application for the first time, and now all of a sudden you're collecting or are able to collect location data. Could people's location data be viewed as sensitive? Could be viewed as sensitive at times. Doesn't fit the classic characteristics, but there's some drug dealers that were pretty upset when the government tracked their vehicles. Because then they were able to say, okay, yeah, you went to this particular spot on these days, this time. So we know, and we know these other drug dealers what they're also, so we know you were making deals. Privacy's for everyone. That's why they have warrants to break that, but maybe you're going someplace you don't want your spouse to know about because you're going to go buy her a really nice gift and you don't want her to know beforehand. Maybe you're going someplace you don't want your boss to know about because you're interviewing and you don't want him to, or her to know beforehand. In lots of places where location data can be sensitive for people. So new data, existing data used in the new ways. Collected email address, you used it just for product support, and now the marketing people go, hey, you got a great throw of data, we want to send them marketing emails twice a day. If you can, you're able to, in terms of when, if you can tie kicking off or starting the privacy impact assessment in with your other project governance, okay, this will require organizational, executive buy-in and sponsorship. That's important. You can tie it with the steering committees so that way when a project kicks off or starts, they say, yep, go assess it. As opposed to coming back at the end of a project and saying, no, stop. Goal is to get in early and influence up front. Project checkpoints, if your project governance includes multiple checkpoints, then that's another good place to hook in. Something to think about and kind of remember is at the beginning of a project, how many people have ran a project where everything went exactly according to the initial plan? Okay. That's the number I was expecting. I mean, you start projects, you don't know everything. Unless it's something that you do repetitively over and over and over again, and even then, surprises occur. So kind of remember that if you're doing the PIA, data will come in late, answers will change. So you need to be prepared to revise and update. How many folks have agile software development going on in their organizations? See, a couple. I mean, get the software developers turning releases around in 2 weeks, 4-week increments. Okay, continually, the application is changing in those types of environments on close to a daily basis with some of the DevOps and people driving. How do you think an application developer who is doing work on a 2-day window is going to react to, oh, here's a privacy assessment that's going to take 2 months? They're going to go, yeah, thank you. Come back when you're done. Also kind of tied back to when, what you want to do is to make the triggers for starting it as easy as possible for people to engage you and to engage in it. Because we know what happens if it's hard to do something, right? That will get done tomorrow or next month or next year, especially, and then someone will have to come from compliance to beat them up, and then they're not happy because it's compliance. An example, and I was just short of comfortable of grabbing screenshots, but I decided not to because it's an HP internal tool. And I figured if I grabbed screenshots that I would probably be stepping past the wrong boundaries, especially since it's recorded. HP internally has an internal application called HP Privacy Advisor. And it's basically an online questionnaire that when people initiate a project, they get to go and fill it out. In terms of making the triggers easy for projects that really have no privacy implications, it's like They type in the project name, who they are, and they answer 2 questions, and it's like, you're done. So that convinces all of those developers that are doing things that really don't involve privacy. And you got somebody writing a device driver for a mouse. It's not collecting any data, not doing any marketing. That guy gets through this questionnaire in about 30 seconds. For people who do have privacy implications, then the questions start unfolding. What type of data are you accessing? Social security number, health data, okay? And then as they start filling that in, additional questions start unfolding in terms of what are you going to do with the data? I'm sending marketing emails. Well, there's a set of policy around how to handle marketing emails. So the guidance and the questions that drive that pop up. No, I'm just collecting it and using it to call them back for their support issue. Okay, questions kind of start collapsing. A key thing includes both product type questions as well as marketing. These are, I'm doing marketing, so I'm going to send marketing emails, or I'm doing products, so I'm writing a product that's collecting social security numbers for some reason, or an application dealing with healthcare. And basically, it's a place where a lot of the standard policies and practices basically get encoded into the questionnaire. So as people go along, they get to the end, and it's like, oh, now I know that because I'm doing cardholder data, PCI, that I need to only display the last 4 digits of a credit card, and I need to call the real PCI people because all of the other requirements are now this big, and I really don't want to have to meet PCI DSS 3.0. Key, easier is to engage and do, the more likely it is to occur, but there's trade-offs. If you don't ask enough information, then you either trap people into it that shouldn't be, or worse, you let people out that actually have significant privacy issues. So, shifting to who for a moment. Here's a real interesting number for me. Trust E did a survey about a year ago, benchmarking survey, and of people doing privacy assessments. And what they discovered was that on average, the typical PIA involved 32 different people. Okay? It's like, okay, 32 different people. Well, we have the business owner, I don't know, a few people on the project team, some IT people, maybe marketing. It's like, I'm having a hard time figuring out how you get to 32. But remember, that's the average, that's not the maximum. Okay, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people with different pieces of input and knowledge about the impact. Now, for those who've done PIAs, are y'all surprised at 32? No, I mean, I got a gal kind of surprised and a no, not surprised at all, which doesn't surprise me because I really imagine this is likely to be somewhat organizationally determinate. Because I've been in some organizations and dealt with organizations where a large meeting was 6 people, and other organizations where a small meeting would be 25. A lot of organizational culture affecting that. But kind of remember, okay, PIA, I mean the business owner or whoever's owning the project, they need to be involved or at least keyed as a stakeholder because that's the group or person that owns the business organization risk. So the senior marketing manager, okay, owns the risk about what marketing is doing. So if they're not involved and engaged, and if they're disengaged and don't feel any ownership of the impact, then they're not going to be able to make the appropriate risk determinations. The project team, obviously, if there's an IT aspect, then it's liable to need to pull in all of the IT areas, the enterprise architect, if you have one, application developers, system administrators, database administrators, because locking it all down and then discovering that the DBA has full access to everything and doesn't realize he should not be copying it someplace or using it in a particular way. That. The actual data consumers or users, marketing, accounting. Am I allowed to call Rich up on his cell phone to ask him about that late payment? Contact center, help desk, sales. And I got those people in twice. And of course, legal, privacy, risk management, if you have those organizations. Because hopefully they have expertise that will help. Some of the challenges, had like a business executive say, okay, just fill it out for me and give me the passing grade. This is what I'm doing, done, right? Project teams who are busy trying to actually get the project done are likely to respond, at least until they see real value coming back to them with, yeah, we'll do that next release. Right? Ever had that type of reaction? The IT guys, like, well, you want me to fill out your form or do you want me to keep the server up? Right? People never do things like that, right? People who are like, wait a minute, we have access to credit card numbers? And of course, I have to pick on my friends in like legal and privacy. They're always there to help, right? I will believe that of Mary. I have run into organizations where the view is maybe a little less helpful and sometimes a little more of they don't feel they can say yes, so they're looking for a reason to say no. Everybody ran into organizations where that's kind of the legal view or the private office view or compliance office view. It's okay. They only see the risk, they don't see the business value. They're not allowed to say yes to the business value, so basically all they can do is feedback and say, you have a problem. That's the nice thing about the other aspect of my job that I do a lot of penetration testing. And that's a place where I get to come in and say, you have a problem. But hopefully in a helpful manner. Because saying you have a problem without providing input, here's how to fix it, or here's what the real risk is, ends up actually not being that helpful. Some how-tos. Okay. PIA, it's a project, right? Or at least it's part of a larger project. So you kind of need to actually plan for it as if it was a project, not as if it's just a single line on the to-do list to check off. That means making sure that people are getting time and effort and dollars, all of those organizational things that says, yes, you can work on this and you should work on this, allocated. The overall PI assessment team is definitely going to be cross-functional, right? Remember, it's like 32 people involved. And that's if that's not cross-functional, I'm not sure what would be, right? Critical inputs, regulations. Hopefully the legal folks have the information or are willing to work with you to determine it, because sometimes, well, let me ask, any lawyers in the room? Okay, any people with legal background or legal training at all? Okay, same thing, I am not a lawyer. I have read some of these laws and regulations, and I've read explanations of some of these laws and regulations, And sometimes I don't understand all of the steps of how the explanation matches the wording of the law, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not trained to think in that way, right? So legal is a key input. Right. Have existing definitions of what personally identifiable information, personal health information, sensitive information is within the organization. That becomes a key input, because that helps drive the question of, if I already know Social Security numbers are PII and considered sensitive PII, I don't have to do much more research. Of course, existing policies, what your internal privacy policy is, any privacy notices that you put up on your website. Commercial companies beginning to learn, actually have learned very clearly that the Federal Trade Commission views privacy notices up on your website as an actually important promise. A few companies have ran afoul of them declaring that, hey, that's unfair or deceptive practice because you claimed you were protecting the data and then you weren't. Other policies, if you have policies about encryption standards, you don't want to come out of PIA saying, well, we ought to do encryption in a totally different way than what all of our current internal standards say. Sometimes you might find that you need the feedback to go get the standards changed. But if you don't know what they are, once again, it's hard to influence them. A couple more on the information lifecycle and the OECD guidelines for principles. Okay, so if you think of information, it comes in, you collect it. So there's actions, and the PIA needs to think about the information that's being collected, PII there, sensitive PII, how is it being collected? Who is it being collected from? Are you giving notice? It gets used, and used is viewed within this life cycle as really internal usage within the company or the application. It gets disclosed, maybe to business partners, maybe aggregated and displayed up as 96 billion hamburgers served for McDonald's. It gets stored, and sometimes I wonder if this ever happens, but in theory, it gets destroyed, right? A record, except for pack rats like me, people aren't supposed to keep them forever, right? So all of these aspects of the life cycle kind of need to ask the questions during the PIA about the sensitive information of how is it being collected, where is it being used, how is it being disclosed, who are we sending it to, business partners, so how are we storing it and protecting it while it's stored, and what are we doing at the end of life of the project or the data in terms of making sure that we're not like pulling those hard drives out, selling them on eBay. That never happens, right? Over the years, there's been interesting articles where people have gone and bought hard drives or thumb drives off of eBay and discovered all types of interesting things. Okay, the OECD guidelines talks about other principle, collection limitation. Specifically, if you don't have a legitimate need for the data, don't collect it. This is a push-pull challenge, right? Does anyone think a marketeer will ever say they don't have a need for some piece of data? Maybe not today, but I'm sure I'll need to know their hat size tomorrow. If not, it'll be useful. Data quality. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Are we collecting the data of the appropriate quality at the appropriate time, right? How many people, when you fill out marketing surveys from companies where they make you type in your phone number and your email and your address and how many employees, how many answer those 100% accurately every time? Or hardly at all, right? Real low data quality there. So make sure that the quality of the data you're collecting matches the usage you're going to use it for. Purpose specification. If you're saying you're collecting this data to send people marketing emails, don't use it to send them other things. If you say you're collecting this so that way you know you can test drug interactions, don't turn around and use it to sell them healthcare, to sell them babysitting services. Right. No use limitation tied to purpose, right? If you collect it for one usage, said you're limiting usage in some ways, you need to stay within that security safeguards. And I'm starting to speak a little faster because the guy in the back is giving me hand warnings. Openness. I don't hide what you're doing. Okay? So if you actually intend to share the data of everybody in the world, put that in your notice and tell people so that people know it. Then they can decide. Individual participation, accountability. Let's talk a little bit about scoping, size, and complexity. It's really vague. You need to make sure that the PIA is complete. If it's a large project, it's like if I'm tasked with saying perform a PIA on Hewlett-Packard, my guess is that my size and complexity is probably going to be a little bigger than I can handle. So I'm going to need to start breaking that down into digestible chunks. Main piece of advice here is look for hopefully natural boundaries. And hopefully that will line up with natural organizational boundaries as well, but I would not count on that, right? Kind of back to data flows.
Rich, you got a question?
Yes.
I know that it's almost 12. We talked about new statewide guidance. We didn't talk about that.
Mm-hmm. We're going to
Yeah.
touch on that.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot right now on that, so we only need a couple minutes for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was maybe a sign off.
Yeah. So look for data flows. Where does the data flow? Look specifically for things like where does it leave the organization? Because that's where you'll need to make sure that the privacy commitments you're making to your clients are being held up by your business partners that you're giving data to. You find this in things like system architecture diagrams, data flow diagrams, interconnection agreements, all of those wonderful documents that IT people put together so that they know what they're connecting to where, and oftentimes don't fill out completely. Also, look for places where things may be hiding in manual processes. Once a month, this person copies the email addresses and puts them on a floppy or a USB drive now and walks them over to the marketing organization that sends out the newsletter. Usage. What do you do with it? How risky is that usage? Is it allowed? We said we weren't going to use the data this way, so maybe we shouldn't be using it this way. Is it appropriate? Maybe it's allowed. Maybe you said you were going to use it, yet still people weren't really thrilled when Target started sending teenagers diaper advertisements, and often before their parents knew about the situation. Look for process definitions, logic. Think about the usage across really the whole life cycle. So the front part is you've now kind of outlined, we know where all of the data is, we know where it's flowing, we know how we're using it. Now we need to start thinking about, gee, what are the risks with all of that? And then what are recommendations we can make? If if you're doing something very new and novel, then there's a good chance that this is going to be much harder to do, right? Just kind of natural. Once again, we're loud, desired. Just because you can do it doesn't always mean you should. You have it. If you don't have the data, then you don't really have the privacy risk associated with it. If you're not storing medical information, a whole lot of privacy risk goes away. Look for things like opt-in, opt-out at data collection. Okay, a couple of samples. This is SEC, Homeland Security, GSA all have sample PIA templates and guides. Lots more floating out there. Most of them, like I said, do seem to be coming out of the federal government because they've been told since 2002 you will do this. They also were told you will make them public. So if you want to go read some of truly varying quality, GSA publishes theirs, Health and Human Services, a pair of links there. Also think about what you want in your final PIA, because as you might imagine, they're not publishing every piece of data that they collected in doing it. And it's very likely that an internal PIA that you're not going to distribute out of your organization, that you'll be willing and actually able to put information in there in terms of background and details that you would not necessarily want to put in a public external document. Okay. And with this, I will switch to Mary real quick.
And I'm not going to use slides, I'm good. We only have a couple minutes, but I wanted to bring you up to date on where we are. The state has been working for several months on developing a privacy impact assessment tool template, similar to what Rich has talked about on some of these samples out there. We've completed the stage 1 process of the new policy and guidance. So we have a governance group that has looked at the first round of the tool, and we're now kicking off the second stage of the development process of the tool. We're bringing in, we're kind of reforming a privacy work group to work on that. And these are, the work group is made up of employees that have done privacy impact assessments, and they have a fairly mature process in their organization, right? So we wanted to bring in people that have done the work before to take a look at the tool in its current form and help develop and mature the tool so that it's going to be able to be used. The first go around, we were really trying to focus on how can we make this easy for departments, and how can we kind of provide them a simple process to follow. But as Rich pointed out in his presentation, right, you have a trade-off there, right? If you make it too simple, you're not maybe capturing everything that you need to be concerned about from a risk perspective. And if you make it too complicated, people can't use it. So we wanted to reconvene our experts, bring them together, take a look at the current state of our tool, and go over it one more time to make sure that we've covered everything. Within the state guidance that's going to come out will also be some direction on not just how to use the tool, but actually putting a framework around, like Rich also pointed out, right? This is a kind of a mini project. This is not a checklist you just go through, check it, and you're done, right? You're actually managing risk with this tool, and you have to go back and revisit it on a regular basis. If you have major changes to your process or your system, you have a major upgrade to it, you need to be pulling out that first PIA and revisiting that and saying, are we still doing the same things in place? Do we have the right security controls? It should be a living document that stays throughout the life of the system or the process until that goes away. This is not a set it once and forget it process, and we want to make sure that we have the right level of guidance to be able to provide you so that it's valuable and that you can adapt it to your internal processes. Rich talked about triggers, great points there. How do you, if you're not doing PIAs today, how do you integrate that in your existing processes, right? Project initiation is a great way to do that. Having some gates in place where projects are not able to go forward and be signed off on until the privacy person has been involved and we know that there's a privacy impact assessment happening. at the statewide level, our office does take a look at the stage 1 business analysis. We're a part of the critical partners, and we have been recommending over the last 6 months that these large IT projects from a statewide perspective must have a privacy impact assessment. So you're going to see some of that getting pushed out to the departments for new projects going forward. Those requirements are starting to be handed down. So we want to make sure that the tool that we put in place will help folks meet those requirements. Debbie,
So
question?
can you talk about the current state requirements for PIAs?
The current state requirement is in the State Administrative Manual, and it's in section 5305.6, right? And it talks at a high level, and there'll be copies of the slides available for you, my slides that have that data in there if you need that pointer. But it talks about that departments and organizations should be managing information security and privacy risk, right? Using methodologies to do that. There's already state requirements for folks to do a privacy impact assessment. In addition, in the SIM, the Statewide Information Management Manual, 5305-A, identifies roles and responsibility for your key designees, your information security officer, your chief information officer, your privacy officer / coordinator. And one of the key responsibilities for your privacy officer is to be assisting and managing a privacy impact assessment process, right? So this is not a new requirement. A lot of folks are doing it in an ad hoc fashion today. They're taking a look at new projects. We want to formalize that process. And lastly, I do want to say, if your organization has already developed and is using a privacy impact assessment, the new state guidance and policy is not going to require you to throw that out. You're going to be able to continue with that. You just need to make sure it's in alignment with the state guidance. Yes?
So when do you anticipate the PIA tool being?
Great question. We anticipate that tool will start, that we'll have our new, or that our reconvened work group together looking at it and have a final ready in about 60 days. And then it'll have to go through the governance and policy release process through the state, which it's hard to put a timeline around that process. It will definitely be after the first of the year. In addition, our office has a new automated tool that we're going to be bringing online in the March timeframe. It's called RSAM, and it's going to be for statewide incident management. And in addition, it will also have a risk assessment module to it, and we'll be building out PIAs. So that paper tool that we're going to put will be automated in the future as well. Okay. Yes, question in the back.
Yeah, so we all know that we've got PIA regardless. We're looking at what happened with OPM.
Yes.
Are you guys going to look at providing a tool that actually talks about doing something or what to mitigate or how to mitigate it?
So great question. Is the tool going to provide guidance on what to do to mitigate the risk that's identified and how to?
Liability, actually, risk is.
Well, I think it's, yeah. The tool itself is not just a collection mechanism. It's not just an inventory. It's going to be, it has an analysis piece section built into it, right? And that's where you have all the stakeholders that Rich talked about, right? In some cases, an average 32. This is not something that just the privacy office does. This is not just something that the business does. And this does not fall on the shoulders of IT. This is a large stakeholder group that needs to be involved in the analysis, right? The first part of the tool generally is a collection mechanism. What's the system going to do? What data elements are going to be involved? How's it going to be shared? The next part of the tool is the analysis piece, right? If you're going to be doing these particular things, how are you going to reduce risk for the organization? And the risks in privacy are much larger than just harm to the organization. There's harm to the individual whose data has been compromised or may have been compromised, as well as your business partners, right? So you have relationships with business partners that you share information with, and if you have risky practices and you're not managing data appropriately, they're not going to want to continue to do business with you. So risk takes on a whole different perspective when we're looking at privacy risk. And those things all need to be considered. So there'll be specific questions within the tool that will help walk you through. There's also a lot of guidance out there right now in our standards framework, which is NIST. NIST Special Publication 853 has an Annex J in it, if you're not familiar with that. And that will really help you kind of tease out what are the risks for privacy and how do we address those. You have another question.
853, the Annex J just gives me the list of things I need to worry about, but it's not actually prescriptive. It says, do you do this, do you do that, do you do that, but it doesn't say, here is technology that I can deploy, or here is a process I need to put in place.
Well, because that's all dependent upon your organization and your level of risk acceptance, right? So you're right, it's not going to give you some privacy enhancing technologies that you need to implement in a particular case. And in some cases, you may implement one technology or one process that will take care of 4 or 5 identified risks. NIST just recently released a draft version of risk management guidance for privacy. So I would recommend you take a look at that. I have not read that document myself, but risk management is not easy and it's not a prescriptive type process. Rich, you want to talk a little bit about how private sector addresses that?
Kind of, and this is maybe going to shift off into the weeds, right? How many people think encryption is important in protecting privacy?
Strong encryption.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I am a technologist. When I say encryption, I do not mean ROT13. You should do the algorithm twice, rotate 26, much better. Guy in the back got the joke.
Not encryption.
Not encryption, barely masking. Okay. Would encryption have solved OPM? No. When the DBA has full access to the data, to what would have been the unencrypted data, and his credentials get exposed, and they're used to pull all of the data out of the database, encrypting it underneath would not have solved that. Okay? Would encryption help if someone walked off with my backpack? Actually, yes, because the hard drive in there is full disk encrypted. And little rubber hose cryptography against me with a wrench and saying, "What's your PIN?" would get you past that as well, but at least if the drive is lost, the data on the drive was not recoverable. You're smiling. It depends upon exactly lots of other possibilities, how much you're willing to spend in some cases, whether it's in sleep mode and whether the encryption keys are still in RAM and you got enough time to pull it out, to freeze the chip, pull it out, put it in another computer. There's lots of attacks, but all of those are things that reduce the risk. Safe harbor type statements. If healthcare information is encrypted and lost, then it's normally, okay, you don't have to bother disclosing that. Executives really like it when it's told you don't have to disclose that, because disclosing that puts it in the newspaper, and everybody goes, well, wait a minute. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on which healthcare guys have been exposed recently. I've got too many stacks in my mail. That's the bigger question, I guess, is which ones haven't. But in a lot of cases, the technology and the answers of how you manage the risk and what you're doing to solve the risk is going to be organization dependent. It can be application dependent. So that's a place where you kind of have to be careful when privacy organizations start being helpful by saying you will do technology A, B, and C. Because in those cases, maybe they're being a little too helpful and they're starting to lock your hands down. The flip side is, if they just say your baby's ugly, go fix it, that doesn't necessarily give you any help. You want to do it, then you go, you push that one and you shove the wrist someplace else and you haven't actually solved any of the problems either. No. Sum it up, it's hard.
Yeah, no, I didn't have anything else. Any other questions? We went a little long. Thank you all for sticking with us, and we appreciate you coming out today.